The rope was already around her neck when the crowd started chanting for blood. Ayanna stood on that makeshift platform, hands bound behind her back, watching dozens of faces twisted with hatred stare up at her. They wanted to watch an Apache woman die. They didn't care if she was innocent. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty town square, where someone had hastily constructed a gallows from old lumber and rope. Ayanna's dark eyes swept across the mob below. Men, women, even children who should have been in school, all gathered to witness what they called justice. But there was no justice here. Only fear and ignorance dressed up as righteousness. Sheriff Brennan stood beside the platform, his hand resting nervously on his gun belt. He kept glancing between Ayanna and the crowd, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The man was weak. She could see it in his trembling fingers and the way he avoided her gaze. He knew this was wrong, but he lacked the spine to stop it. "String her up already!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. Others joined in, their voices creating a chorus of bloodlust that echoed off the wooden buildings surrounding the square. Ayanna closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother's words. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. A woman near the front, her face pinched with hatred, picked up a stone and hurled it toward the platform. It struck Ayanna's shoulder, sending a sharp pain down her arm. The crowd cheered as if they'd just witnessed something heroic instead of cowardly. More stones followed, and Ayanna forced herself to stand straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. "My husband's blood is on your hands," the woman screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You and your savage people killed him in cold blood." Ayanna wanted to tell her the truth, that she'd been 50 miles away when the attack happened, tending to her sick cousin in the hills. But they wouldn't listen. They'd already decided she was guilty the moment they saw her Apache features. To them, one Apache was the same as another, all responsible for every crime committed by any member of her people. Sheriff Brennan cleared his throat and unfolded a piece of paper with shaking hands. "Ayanna of the Apache tribe," he began, his voice barely audible over the crowd's murmur. "You stand accused of murder, theft, and conspiracy against the people of this territory. The charges were lies, every single one." But as Ayanna looked out at the sea of hostile faces, she realized the truth had died long before she'd been dragged to this platform. These people needed someone to blame for their fear, their losses, their inability to understand a world where different peoples tried to share the same land. A man stepped forward from the crowd, his face scarred from what looked like a knife wound. "That Apache witch probably cursed our wells too," he spat. "Ever since they started raiding our settlements, nothing's been right in this town." But Ayanna hadn't raided anything. She'd been trying to find work, to earn enough money to buy medicine for her cousin who'd fallen ill with fever. She'd made the mistake of coming to this town alone, thinking these people might show mercy to a woman traveling without warriors. Instead, they'd seen opportunity, someone to punish for crimes they couldn't solve. The noose felt heavy against her neck as Sheriff Brennan positioned himself near the lever that would open the trapdoor beneath her feet. His hands were shaking so badly now that she wondered if he'd be able to pull it when the time came. Part of her almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast from the edge of town, and something in the rhythm made several people in the crowd turn their heads toward the sound. The rider emerged from the dust cloud like something out of a fever dream. His horse was massive, black as midnight, and the man sitting tall in the saddle carried himself with the kind of authority that made conversations stop mid-sentence. Caleb Thornfield had arrived, and even from a distance, Ayanna could see the way the crowd's energy shifted. "What's the meaning of this?" Caleb's voice cut through the morning air as he dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with weathered hands that spoke of years working cattle and land. But it was his eyes that caught Ayanna's attention. They held a hardness that suggested he'd seen enough injustice to recognize it when it stared him in the face. Sheriff Brennan stepped forward, relief flooding his features like a man who'd just been thrown a lifeline. "Mr. Thornfield, sir, we're carrying out justice for the Hendricks family. This Apache woman here, she's responsible for Tom Hendricks's death." Caleb's gaze moved slowly from the sheriff to Ayanna, then back to the crowd. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture suggested he was calculating, measuring, deciding. "And what evidence do you have against her?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other as if hoping someone else would provide an answer that made sense. The scarred man who'd spoken earlier stepped forward. puffing out his chest. Evidence, he snarled. She's Apache, ain't she? That's all the evidence we need. Her people killed Tom Hendricks and stole his horses. She's probably here scouting for the next raid. Caleb turned his full attention to the man, and Ayanna watched as the scarred face went pale under that steady stare. So your evidence is her bloodline, Marshall Creek? That's what passes for justice in this town now? Marshall Creek's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You defending savages now, Thornfield. Maybe all that time alone on your ranch has made you soft toward their kind. The insult hit its mark, but not in the way Creek intended. Instead of backing down, Caleb stepped closer, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with danger. Careful, Creek. I've buried better men than you for saying less. Ayanna felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the confrontation unfold. This stranger, this Caleb Thornfield, was risking his reputation, maybe his life, to question what this mob called justice. But why? She'd never seen him before, had no claim on his protection or loyalty. Sheriff Brennan raised his hands, trying to diffuse the tension. Now, gentlemen, let's keep this civil. Mr. Thornfield, I understand your concerns, but the people of this town have spoken. They want justice for what happened to the Hendricks family. Justice? Caleb's laugh was cold, sharp as a blade. You call this justice? Stringing up a woman based on nothing but fear and prejudice? The crowd began to murmur, some voices rising in anger. A woman near the back shouted, "She's one of them that killed our people." Others joined in, their voices blending into a chorus of accusation and hatred. But Caleb wasn't finished. He looked up at Ayanna, and for the first time since they'd put that noose around her neck, she saw something she'd almost forgotten existed: compassion in a white man's eyes. "Has anyone bothered to ask her where she was when Hendricks was killed?" Caleb called out, his voice carrying over the crowd's noise. "Or are we just going to murder a woman, because it's easier than finding the real killers?" That's when Marshall Creek made his first serious mistake. He reached for his gun. Caleb's hand moved faster than lightning, his Colt clearing leather before Creek's fingers even touched his grip. The metallic click of the hammer being pulled back echoed across the suddenly silent town square, like a death sentence waiting to be carried out. "I wouldn't," Caleb said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that made smart men very nervous. Creek's hand froze halfway to his weapon, sweat now visible on his scarred forehead. "Unless you're faster than me, Marshall, and I'm betting you're not." The crowd had gone dead silent, the kind of quiet that settles over a place when violence hangs in the air like smoke. Ayanna watched from the platform, her heart pounding as she realized this stranger was willing to kill to defend her. But why? What could she possibly mean to a man she'd never met? Sheriff Brennan's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. "Now hold on, both of you. There's no need for gunplay here. We're civilized people." Civilized? Caleb kept his gun trained on Creek while his eyes swept the crowd. Civilized people don't lynch women without evidence. They don't gather like vultures to watch someone die for the crime of being born different. An older woman in a black dress pushed forward from the crowd, her face twisted with grief and rage. "That woman's people murdered my son. They scalped him and left him for the buzzards. Don't you dare lecture us about civilization when we're burying our children." Ayanna's throat tightened. She knew the pain in that woman's voice, had felt it herself when soldiers had killed her brother 3 winters ago. But pain didn't justify murder, and grief didn't make lies into truth. "Mrs. Patterson," Caleb said, his voice gentler now but his gun still steady on Creek, "I'm sorry for your loss." "Truly, but killing an innocent woman won't bring your boy back." "Innocent?" Creek spat, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "She admits she's Apache. That makes her guilty of every crime her people ever committed." Caleb's eyes hardened again. "By that logic, Creek, every white man here is guilty of every atrocity ever committed by white soldiers. Should we string you all up too?" The comparison hit the crowd like a slap. Several people looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. But their bloodlust hadn't cooled entirely. A young man with angry eyes stepped forward. "My pa says the only good Apache is a dead Apache," he declared, his voice shaking with nervous energy. Maybe it's time this town had a leader who understands that. Caleb slowly turned to face the young man, and Ayanna saw something dangerous flicker in his expression. "Your pa teach you to murder women too, boy? Or did you come up with that particular brand of courage all by yourself?" The insult struck home. The young man's face flushed red, and his hand moved toward the knife at his belt. But before he could draw it, another voice cut through the tension. Maybe we should hear what she has to say. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Dr. Morrison, the town physician, a respected man whose opinion carried weight. He pushed through the crowd slowly, his medical bag in hand, his gray beard neatly trimmed despite the early hour. Before we do something we can't undo, Dr. Morrison continued, perhaps we should at least listen to her side of the story. Creek's lip curled in disgust. Since when do we negotiate with savages, Doc? But something had shifted in the crowd's mood, and Ayanna could feel it like a change in the weather. Dr. Morrison's words created a crack in the mob's certainty, and Caleb seized the moment. The doctor's right. If we're going to take a life, we'd better be damn sure we're taking the right one. Sheriff Brennan looked between the crowd and the platform, clearly torn between his duty and his desire to avoid bloodshed. I suppose we could hear what she has to say. But that doesn't mean, cut her down from there, Caleb interrupted, holstering his weapon but keeping his stance ready. No one should have to defend themselves with a noose around their neck. Creek laughed bitterly. You're going soft, Thornfield. Next thing you know, you'll be inviting Apaches to Sunday dinner. Something dark passed across Caleb's face at those words, a shadow that suggested old pain. Ayanna caught it, even from the platform, and wondered what ghosts this man carried. But he composed himself quickly, addressing the sheriff with quiet authority. Brennan, either you cut her down, or I will. And if I have to come up there myself, Creek here might find himself explaining to God why he thought drawing on me was a good idea. The sheriff's hands shook as he climbed the platform steps. Ayanna felt the rope loosen around her neck, and for the first time in hours, she could breathe without feeling death's cold fingers against her throat. When Brennan cut the bonds around her wrists, circulation returned to her hands like fire. Now, Caleb called up to her. Tell us where you were when Tom Hendricks was killed. Ayanna rubbed her wrists and looked out at the sea of hostile faces. Most still wanted her blood, but a few seemed genuinely curious to hear what she had to say. Dr. Morrison nodded encouragingly, while Creek scowled like a man watching his entertainment being ruined. I was 50 miles north, she said, her voice steady despite everything they'd put her through. In the hill country, caring for my cousin who had taken ill with fever. She couldn't keep food down, couldn't even stand without help. Convenient story, Creek sneered. Got any witnesses to back that up? Oh wait, I forgot. Apaches don't exactly keep written records. But Doctor, Morrison stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. What kind of fever? What were the symptoms? Ayanna looked down at him, surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. She burned hot for 3 days and nights, couldn't hold water down. Her skin turned yellow like autumn leaves. The doctor's eyebrows rose. Did you treat her with willow bark tea and cool compresses? Yes, Ayanna replied. And ground echinacea root mixed with honey when we could find it. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. Those are the right treatments for what sounds like yellow fever. Most people around here wouldn't know that combination. He turned to address the crowd. She knows medicine. Real medicine, not superstition. But Creek wasn't convinced. So she knows some folk remedies. That doesn't prove she wasn't raiding settlements. Caleb stepped closer to the platform. What's your cousin's name? Where exactly were you caring for her? Her name is Singing Bird. We were camped near Eagle's Nest Rock by the stream that runs clear even in drought years. Ayanna's voice carried the ring of truth, each detail specific and immediate. An uncomfortable murmur went through the crowd. Several people exchanged glances, and Ayanna sensed their certainty beginning to waver. But she also knew that doubt could be dangerous too. People who'd worked themselves up for a lynching didn't like having their bloodlust frustrated. That's when a new voice spoke up from the back of the crowd. She's telling the truth about Eagle's Nest Rock. Everyone turned to see a grizzled prospector pushing through the crowd, his clothes dusty from the trail. Name's Jonas Fletcher. I was working claims up that way last week. Saw an Apache woman tending to a sick girl by that very stream. Figured it was none of my business as long as they didn't bother me. Creek's face turned red with frustration. One witness don't prove nothing. Maybe they were planning raids between nursing duties. But Caleb had heard enough. He looked up at Ayanna with something that might have been respect. Miss, what's your full name? Ayanna Three Hawks, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Miss Three Hawks, Caleb said formally. I believe you're innocent of these charges. The crowd erupted in angry shouts, but underneath their fury, Ayanna heard something else. The sound of doubt creeping in like water through a cracked dam. The crowd's anger reached a boiling point as Creek raised his voice above the chaos. So what if she wasn't there that exact day? Her people still killed Tom Hendricks. Apache blood runs in her veins, and that makes her guilty of every raid, every murder, every scalping her kind ever did. His words struck a chord with many in the crowd. Heads nodded, fists clenched, and the hunger for violence began to rebuild like a fire-fed fresh kindling. Ayanna felt the momentum shifting back toward the gallows, and fear crept up her spine despite Caleb's protection. But Caleb stepped onto the platform beside her, his presence commanding attention. "Let me tell you something about guilt by bloodline," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "My grandfather fought in the war against Mexico. Does that make me responsible for every Mexican who died in that conflict? That's different," Creek shot back. "We're civilized people. We don't scalp children and burn homesteads, don't we?" Caleb's question hit like a thunderbolt. "What about the Apache children killed at Sand Creek? What about the villages burned by our cavalry? If we're going to judge people by their bloodline, then every man here shares the guilt for those atrocities too." The comparison made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Mrs. Patterson, the grieving mother who'd spoken earlier, looked troubled by Caleb's words, but Creek sensed his support slipping and played his strongest card. "You're defending her awful hard for someone who just met her," Creek said with a sly grin. "Makes a man wonder if maybe you got other reasons for wanting to keep this Apache woman alive." The insinuation hung in the air like poison. Ayanna felt the crowd's mood turn ugly again as they latched onto Creek's implication. Whispers started, crude suggestions about Caleb's motives for protecting an Apache woman. Caleb's face went stone cold. "Careful, Creek. You're walking on dangerous ground." "Am I?" Creek's confidence grew as he sensed the crowd rallying behind him again. Maybe the great Caleb Thornfield has a taste for savage women. Maybe that's why he's so eager to... Creek never finished the sentence. Caleb moved with deadly speed, vaulting off the platform and crossing the distance between them in 3 quick strides. His fist connected with Creek's jaw with a sound like splitting wood, sending the man sprawling in the dirt. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some cheered the fight, others tried to break it up, and still others called for Ayanna to be strung up while the men were distracted. In the confusion, Sheriff Brennan drew his gun but seemed unsure who to point it at. Creek rolled to his feet, blood streaming from his split lip, and this time he managed to clear his weapon. "Now you've done it, Thornfield. Time someone taught you that savage loving gets a man killed." Caleb faced him down, unarmed but unafraid. The two men circled each other like wolves, and Ayanna realized with growing horror that blood was about to be spilled over her. If you were Caleb, what would you do? Draw your gun and risk killing a man in front of the whole town? Or try to talk Creek down and risk being shot yourself? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose, because what Caleb decided next would determine whether Ayanna lived to see another sunset. But before either man could make their move, a new voice cut through the chaos. Young, clear, and absolutely terrified. "Stop. Please, everybody stop." A boy of maybe 12 years old came running into the square, tears streaming down his face, clutching something in his small hands that would change everything. The boy stumbled into the center of the confrontation, his chest heaving from running hard. Creek and Caleb both froze, their deadly standoff interrupted by this unexpected arrival. The child looked around desperately, his young face streaked with tears and dirt. "Please," he gasped, holding up what looked like a torn piece of fabric. "You can't hurt her. She saved my life." Sheriff Brennan lowered his gun, confusion replacing the tension in his voice. "Billy? Billy Hendricks? What are you doing here, son? You should be home with your ma." Ayanna's heart nearly stopped. This was Tom Hendricks' boy, the son of the man she was accused of killing. If anyone in this crowd had reason to want her dead, it was this child. Yet here he was, defending her. Creek wiped blood from his lip, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the boy. "What's this nonsense about her saving your life? This woman's people killed your pa." Billy shook his head violently, clutching the fabric tighter. "No, you're all wrong. It wasn't her people who killed pa. I saw who really did it." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Even the birds seemed to stop singing as everyone strained to hear what the boy would say next. Dr. Morrison stepped forward gently, his voice kind but urgent. "Billy, son, tell us what you saw. Take your time." The boy's voice shook as he began his story. "Pa and me were checking the north pasture when we heard shooting. Pa told me to hide in the rocks while he went to see what was happening. That's when the bad men came." "What bad men?" Caleb asked, his confrontation with Creek forgotten for the moment. "White men," Billy said, his words hitting the crowd like physical blows. 3 of them, dressed like cowboys, but with bandanas covering their faces. They had Pa's horses already loaded with supplies they'd stolen from our ranch. Creek's face had gone pale, but he tried to maintain his aggression. The boy's confused, scared. Maybe he saw Apaches, but his mind's playing tricks. "I know what I saw," Billy interrupted with surprising force. One of them had a scar on his hand shaped like a crescent moon. Another one walked with a limp from an old injury. "These weren't Indians, Mr. Creek. These were white men stealing from us and making it look like Apache raids." The implications of Billy's words rippled through the crowd like wildfire. If he was telling the truth, then not only was Ayanna innocent, but the real killers were still out there. Worse, they were deliberately framing the Apache for their crimes. Mrs. Patterson pushed forward, her face a mixture of hope and anguish. "Billy, are you certain? You're absolutely sure it wasn't Indians who killed your father?" "Yes, ma'am," Billy said, then held up the torn fabric. "This piece came from one of their shirts when Pa fought back. It's blue cotton with white stitching. I never saw any Apache wear cloth like this." Dr. Morrison examined the fabric, nodding slowly. "This is definitely from a white man's shirt. Good quality cotton. Machine-stitched. Not something you'd find in an Apache camp." But Creek wasn't ready to give up his narrative. "Even if that's true, it doesn't prove she's innocent. Could be her people working with white outlaws. Happens all the time. Savages team up with criminals to raid honest folks." Caleb stepped closer to Creek, his patience finally exhausted. "You're reaching, Creek. Face the truth. You were about to lynch an innocent woman." "Innocent?" Creek spat. "She's still Apache. Still one of them that's been raiding our territory. Even if she didn't kill Hendricks, she's guilty of something." That's when Billy did something that surprised everyone. The 12-year-old boy walked directly to the platform where Ayanna stood and looked up at her with eyes that held more wisdom than a child should possess. "Miss," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for what these people tried to do to you. My pa always taught me that a man's judged by his actions, not his blood. He would have been ashamed to see you treated this way." Ayanna felt tears sting her eyes for the first time since this ordeal began. This boy, who had every reason to hate her, was showing more humanity than the entire mob combined. But Creek's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "This changes nothing. Even if she didn't kill Hendricks, she's still Apache, still dangerous. Still needs to hang." That's when Jonas Fletcher, the prospector, spoke up with information that would shatter everyone's assumptions about the recent raids. Jonas Fletcher stepped forward, his weathered face grim with purpose. "Speaking of those raids, I got something to say that might interest folks." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Found this near my claim last week. Same day I saw Miss Three Hawks tending her sick cousin." He opened the pouch and poured several items into his palm. A silver watch, a wedding ring, and a distinctive brass button. The crowd pressed closer to see, and Mrs. Patterson gasped when she recognized the watch. "That's Tom's watch. The one his father gave him before he died." Jonas nodded solemnly. "Found it in a camp about 2 miles from where Miss Three Hawks was nursing her cousin. But here's the interesting part. This camp belonged to white men. I could tell by the boot prints, the way they arranged their gear, even the type of coffee grounds they left behind." Creek's face had gone from pale to ashen, but he wasn't finished fighting. "So what? Maybe some whites found the watch after the Apaches dropped it." "Maybe," Jonas said, then reached into his other pocket. "Except I also found this." He held up a piece of paper, creased and dirty but still readable. "Looks like a list of homesteads to hit next. Written in English, in a white man's hand." Sheriff Brennan took the paper with shaking fingers and read it aloud. "Johnson Ranch, Friday. Miller Farm, Saturday. Hendricks Place a Sunday." His voice cracked as he looked up. "Tom was killed on Sunday." The implications hit the crowd like a landslide. Not only had they been wrong about Ayanna, but there was an organized group of white outlaws systematically raiding homesteads and letting the Apache take the blame. The silence stretched long and uncomfortable as people began to realize what they'd almost done. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "Miss Three Hawks, I believe I speak for many here when I say we owe you a profound apology." But Creek wasn't ready to admit defeat. His face twisted with desperate rage as he saw his narrative crumbling. "This is all lies, planted evidence. You're all being fooled by Apache trickery. Enough." "Creek," Caleb said, his voice carrying final authority. "Face the truth. You were wrong." That's when Creek made his final, fatal mistake. With a snarl of rage, He raised his gun toward Ayanna, determined to finish what the mob had started even if he had to do it alone. If nobody else has the guts to kill this savage. I will! Caleb's Colt cleared leather with lightning speed, the shot echoing across the town square like thunder. Creek's gun flew from his hand as the bullet shattered his wrist, sending him screaming to his knees in the dirt. Next man who threatens Miss Three Hawks will get worse than a broken wrist, Caleb announced, his smoking gun still in his hand. The crowd backed away, finally understanding that their bloodlust had consequences. Billy Hendricks stepped closer to Ayanna, his young voice carrying across the now silent square. Miss, I'm sorry about what they did to you. My pa would have been ashamed of this whole town today. Ayanna looked down at the boy, then at Caleb, then at the faces of people who minutes earlier had been screaming for her death. Some looked ashamed now, others confused, but the hatred had finally burned out of their eyes. Sheriff Brennan holstered his weapon and approached the platform. Miss Three Hawks, on behalf of this town, I apologize. You're free to go. But as Ayanna stepped down from the platform, she realized her ordeal had revealed something darker than simple prejudice. There were organized criminals using racial hatred as cover for their crimes, and until they were caught, both Apache and white settlers would continue to suffer. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. Those outlaws are still out there, still killing people and letting your people take the blame. Ayanna met his gaze directly. Then, we need to stop them. 3 hours later, Caleb and Ayanna rode side by side toward the northern hills, following the trail Jonas Fletcher had described. Sheriff Brennan had deputized them both after Dr. Morrison convinced the town council that stopping the real killers was more important than nursing wounded pride. Billy Hendricks had insisted on coming too, despite his young age. Those men killed my pa, he'd said with determination, that reminded Ayanna of warriors twice his age. I got a right to see justice done. The trail led through rocky country that Ayanna knew well. Her people had hidden in these hills for generations, and she could read the signs the outlaws had left behind like words on a page. Broken twigs, disturbed stones, the faint scent of their horses carried on the wind. 3 men, she said quietly, studying hoofprints in a patch of soft earth. Heading for Eagle Canyon. There's water there. Good grass for horses. Caleb checked his rifle and adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. Think they know we're coming? Not yet, but they will soon. Ayanna pointed toward a thin column of smoke rising from the canyon ahead. They're cooking their midday meal, feeling safe because they think everyone blames the Apache for their crimes. As they approached the canyon rim, Ayanna held up her hand for silence. Below them, she could see the outlaws' camp. 3 men lounging around a small fire, their stolen goods piled nearby. One had a distinctive crescent-shaped scar on his hand, exactly as Billy had described. That's them, Billy whispered, his young voice tight with recognition and pain. Caleb studied the camp with a tactician's eye. 2 ways down into that canyon. We take them from both sides. They've got nowhere to run. But Ayanna had a different idea. Let me go down alone first. They'll think I'm just a lost Apache woman. When I get close enough, too dangerous, Caleb said immediately. If they recognize you, they won't. Ayanna's voice carried quiet confidence. To men like them, all Apache look the same. Besides, they think I'm dead by now, hanged in your town square. 20 minutes later, Ayanna walked her horse slowly down the canyon trail, playing the part of a weary traveler seeking water. The outlaws looked up as she approached, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. Well, well, the scarred man called out. What have we here? Little Apache girl lost? Ayanna kept her expression neutral, speaking in broken English. Water for horse, please. The men relaxed, seeing only what they expected. A harmless Apache woman who posed no threat. They didn't notice Caleb and Billy positioning themselves on the canyon rim above. Sure, honey, the scarred man said with a cruel grin. But first, maybe you can tell us about your people's camps. We're always interested in Apache. Activities. That's when Ayanna dropped the act. Her voice turned cold as winter wind. The only thing I'll tell you is that Tom Hendricks's murder ends today. The outlaws went for their guns, but Ayanna was already moving. Her knife flashed in the sunlight, striking the scarred man's gun hand before he could clear leather. Caleb's rifle cracked from above, and the second outlaw spun and fell. The third man tried to run but found Billy blocking his path, the boy's father's rifle trained steady on his chest. Within minutes, it was over. The real killers were bound and ready for transport back to town, along with evidence of their crimes, stolen goods from a dozen homesteads, all blamed on Apache raids. As they prepared to leave, Billy approached Ayanna with something in his hands. It was his father's watch, the one Jonas had found in the Outlaws' camp. "Miss Threehawks," the boy said formally, "my pa always said a person should be judged by their character, not their blood. I'd be honored if you'd keep this, to remember that some folks know the difference between justice and revenge." Ayanna accepted the watch with tears in her eyes. In all her years, no white person had ever offered her such a gesture of respect and trust. 3 days later, the Outlaws were tried and sentenced. The town of Cedar Falls issued a formal apology to the Apache people, and Sheriff Brennan established new policies requiring evidence before accusations. Caleb donated money to help Apache families whose relatives had been wrongly killed in retaliation for the Outlaws' crimes. As for Ayanna, she chose to stay in the territory, working as a translator and liaison between the Apache and white settlers. Her courage on that gallows platform had saved more than just her own life. It had opened eyes and changed hearts. Billy Hendricks grew up to become a lawyer who specialized in defending the rights of Native peoples. He always wore his father's watch, and whenever someone asked about it, he'd tell them the story of the Apache woman who taught him that justice is colorblind. And Caleb? He and Ayanna remained close friends, their bond forged in the fire of that terrible day when a town nearly lost its soul to hatred and fear. Together they proved that courage and truth could triumph over prejudice, one heart at a time. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful it'll change how you see justice forever. Click on the video now.